Good morning or evening, depending where you are. Hey, Andreas, how's it going?
Hi, very
Hi.
good.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining the Monday morning data chat. We got special guest, kind of regular guest, actually, Andreas
Yeah,
Kretz.
at this
So,
point.
yeah,
Sorry, you're no longer special. You're just regular.
but you are regular. So, it's awesome. What you been up to?
Yeah, creating courses, working a lot on the academy.
That's awesome. How's it
That
been going?
good, really good. Finished a few courses for like MongoDB was last, so people get a bit more into the document stores.
Hmm.
Interesting. We're actually writing about this in the book right now. What's your take? How do you approach MongoDB? I mean, from our point of view with data engineering, the complication is like untangling these complicated schemas in a very standardized way. And then do you land the data into a cloud data warehouse? How do you structure it? Like, how's it going to be useful to process it?
But generally, I think the cool thing with these document stores in MongoDB, I think it's the biggest out there. I think.
Yeah.
And the cool thing, and what I like is that you don't have to create 10 tables for doing one thing, right? You create a schema and you put it in there, you create a JSON, and that's it. If you want to query it and it works for what you want to do with it, you just query one document and don't do like join this and figure out the right join for the tables. Like it's just a very simple boom, 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 and then you have your data.
Yep.
Like, I think it's really cool when you come from a relational world.
Oh, it's almost as if it's like science fiction.
It
Right?
feels like
I
it,
can
right?
just put all
Yeah.
my data in here and that's it. Like, what's the catch? What do you want? Yeah, that's so true. Do you have any recommendations for how to design a MongoDB schema?
Well, it's hard to generalize this, but I think one thing people should keep in mind that although it's schema-less, you need to define a schema and actually stick to it, and not like
Yeah.
create like a pit where just you throw in everything. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. Like
We've seen terrible examples of this. I think I saw one example where they had like used the date as a key or something like that.
Yeah, we saw that actually.
Horrifying.
Yeah, it was bananas.
Yeah.
so
Yeah, but it's an interesting one too. I mean, it's I started using it back, I think 2011 or something like that, and I thought it was like the coolest thing I'd ever seen back then because it took away a lot of the headache, and it was interesting too because I think at the same time you saw like the mean stack popping up for application development and stuff, so it's really cool. And it's definitely one of those things where I think there's definitely it's an art form because, like you say, you got to be very intentional about how you design the schema on that thing because it can get wild in some pretty crazy ways. So.
also with MongoDB is that you have to set some indices, right?
Yeah.
And one of my students was recently working with Cosmos DB on Azure, and that's like you don't have to really set indices. It's indexing everything, right? So this Cosmos is even a bit cooler.
Yeah, you've played around with Cosmos a bit, Joe, right?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. Yeah, the fact that you can also tack in different technologies as well, I think is pretty fascinating. So it's an interesting technology for sure. Yeah. So also, any listeners out there have questions, obviously, let us know. We can nerd out on databases until you ask a question, which means ask a question because we'll go off the deep end pretty soon. Yeah. What's been on your mind lately? Apart from Mongo, I mean, you've been what else you've been thinking about?
I'm currently like, and I was really frustrated this morning. Like, I think I've spent 4 hours on my latest course. I was getting stuck. Like I'm trying to do something very, very simple, like set up Kafka in a Docker container, set up a Jupyter notebook in the other with Spark, PySpark, and just have them talking to each other. And you would think that this is the easiest thing ever, but then comes the problem that why I hate Spark is because of the compatibilities of each other. Like, it's the dumbest thing, and then the versions don't fit together, and then it doesn't work. Like, and why? No idea. No idea.
How much of data engineering is this kind of like really boring stuff? In other words, things like version management and even parsing just nasty data that should not be nasty, that was just misformatted when it was sent to you.
Well, I think the actual like figuring out which tools fit together, that's most likely not a real problem. But like the other stuff is like, I want to hear. Can I share my screen? I want to show you what I was working with.
I think so. See if you can share.
Yeah.
Share here, and it's the dumbest thing. Like how I got this. So let me get you out of here. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So
can we see
yeah.
There we go.
Like here's the structured streaming straight from Apache Spark, right? And I was looking at this, and I know, okay, how can you subscribe to a topic and everything, but it always said here like read stream. That's not known. Like that library isn't there. Like, why?
Huh?
Why is that not there? For like, what's going on? And then I figured out I was using a Docker container, the PySpark, the Jupyter All Spark notebook, and the Jupyter All Spark notebook doesn't run on version 2 of Spark. It runs on version 3. And you see what's here missing on version 3? There is no Python for structured streaming here right now.
Oh.
So I was playing around for an hour and trying to figure out the problem, and it wasn't even with me. So I haven't really researched it, but I looked into forums, and they said, yeah, it's because like that stuff isn't there.
Oh,
then,
awesome.
That's like, well, you spend so much time with this dumb stuff. And I was really happy once I found it out. Didn't work then either way, but one problem got solved.
I think this happens to us often, Matt, right?
A lot. Oh, yeah, no question. And even, I hate to admit it, but like even some of the client work we have to do, it's like, okay, your Airflow cluster is way out of date. So we have to like migrate all of your DAGs forward and test them on a new version. And you guys want to do that, or you want us to help you out? Because it really needs to be done, or you're going to have security problems, like that kind of stuff, for example.
Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder how much of, I'd love the audience to maybe chime in here. Like, how much time do you actually spend just dealing with dependency management and tracking down really just inconsistencies, like Andreas just pointed out? You think this would be a solved problem? This ends up being like one of the harder problems in data engineering. It's just like compatibility issues.
Well, and then upgrading your code, right? Because even if you're using a managed service, at some point they stop supporting whatever version you're on, and then the new version. Like, I assume Spark 3, there are probably a lot of breaking API changes. Certainly with Airflow 2, there are lots of breaking API changes. So you're going to have to change your code to make things work again.
Yeah. That's the thing. Now, I think nowadays it's a bit simpler because like Kafka and so on, they have evolved. It's not like they make the big changes anymore with every version. But like, it can be really annoying because you don't know it. Most of the time, you make the update, and then you don't know that you need to update something. You only see that it broke. What to do now?
Yeah,
maybe one hack for that is to go look at so in the clouds, for example, with GCP or EMR or an AWS, like they'll have the bundles of all the different products, and maybe that's one way to maybe check and see like what version numbers you're using. So Spark, 3 and Kafka, whatever is compatible with that. That might be one way to do it. So because they wouldn't make a release without making sure all of them work. So it sucks that it would have to come down to something like that, or reading through docs and finding out that Python doesn't actually work in that library at all. Yeah. So, but it is what it is. So we got a question here. Hey, Mahesh, he asks, we have huge database, and we have SAS and also SQL. Same data in both sources, but SQL reporting is problematic. Users say it's incorrect. Is SAS more accurate in aggregation than SQL? And in SAS, data can be dumped into file and shared with other users so that users don't have to run the same queries multiple times. Is this possible in SQL?
It's going to depend a lot on the tech stack in terms of data sharing and table sharing and such. Interesting. Yeah, this sounds like another like very common type of data engineering problem where someone tells you the data is incorrect, but tracking down that problem is not easy necessarily.
Oh, Andreas, I think you might be muted.
Yeah, I was
there
muted.
we go.
Yeah. I was muted. I have to say, let me read that again.
Yeah, no worries. I would say that I don't know that it's I can't make a claim like SAS would be more accurate than SQL in aggregations. I guess it depends what kind of aggregations you're doing, but it would have to be a very interesting aggregation for these two to deviate. Like at the end of the day, math is math. Like counts and sums and everything else is, I think, pretty idempotent in that sense. Yeah, I rule out the first suspicion, which is that SAS is more or less accurate than SQL in terms of aggregations.
But I mean, I would ask, what kinds of just basic data statistics checks have you run to verify that the data is exporting and importing correctly? Because one of the most common things that happens is that the data is exported, but there's some slight difference in the way the import system handles the data. Maybe some rows are getting dropped or something like this. And so that's what's causing the misalignment. It's a notorious problem with CSVs where every system kind of handles CSVs differently. And then your import system, is it throwing errors or is it just dropping bad rows so that you're actually losing data when you do the transfer?
One thing I'm always a bit hesitant is when I read like here that they extract the data and then it will be dumped into a file and shared with other users. Like, isn't there a better solution for this in 2021 than just like trying to manage
this is how it's all
files
done. No, that you're absolutely right. I think that's a big red flag. Like when you see the word dump into file and share with other users. Yeah, I mean, there's not enough context to know whether or not what we're recommending is even a solution. But I would say, like, to recap, SAS. I don't know. There's an argument that it's more or less accurate than SQL. And two, if you're dumping data into files and sharing it with others, maybe don't do that. Maybe use like a database and have people connect to that database and query the data using SQL, for example. So is that controversial at all to you guys?
No. The problem, I mean, when we come back to files, it's not just files, but it's so often CSV files too, which are just notoriously a huge headache. I mean, at least if it's like Parquet or some format with built-in schema, then the odds are better that it's going to work.
Dumping into file due to memory constraints.
Oh, got it.
I would say maybe you should look at a different database if you have memory constraints. Like there's a lot of good data warehouses out there right now that you don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. I just think by introducing files, you're introducing a lot of potential error into your process.
Yeah, that's very often a problem.
Yeah, the way of the future is to fax everything.
High speed fax, gigabit faxes are coming.
Gigabit fax, like Google Fax is coming out pretty soon.
That's right.
That sounds like a great solution.
Yeah, so just stay tuned. But no, I'm in all seriousness, I'm trying to be, too sarcastic here. But yeah, if you're dumping in the files for memory constraints, I'd be looking at your hardware, trying to get something else. It's RAM. Yeah, get a different database. Upgrade, or like I said, there's a lot of cloud solutions out there. If you can do the cloud. If you can't, then find a different solution. We use carrier pigeons. Cool. Yeah, I figured Mark would be doing that. Yeah.
But it's a reality, right? Like I don't know. It comes up so often where like a public data source, they just give you a file and the file is badly formatted and you have to try to figure out how to make sense of it. Mm-hmm. We ran into this, so it was this idle. So it was like this COVID loan data that was posted by the SBA, the Small Business Association in the US. And we were trying to help a client ingest it, and they had like totally mangled the text inside the files. And so it was like trying to figure out how to make sense of this. And unfortunately, that's a very common reality for data engineering. And if you don't control the data source, then good luck. You just fix it the best you can.
Which is often the case, because like upstream, software engineers or people responsible for the data or third parties are probably, your problems may not be their problems, even though they're the ones who cause your problems. But,
yeah, it's right. Like you use the API from somewhere, like from a third party, because that's part of your business, and then they change the API and like tell you an hour before they changed something, and so then you have to like try to fix it.
Yeah,
it's not fun.
I mean, this is fundamentally a big criticism of REST, right? Because REST is not actually a standard. It really just gives you a way of making API calls. But the actual API calls and the way they pass data, that's custom to every API. And like you said, Andreas, it changes over time.
Yeah.
Andreas, we got a question from one of your old students. Well, it's also a comment. He's watching from his new job.
Congrats.
Congrats on the new job. He wants to know about PyTest and data engineering. What do you want to know about PyTest? But I think we can maybe talk about that. Do you have any thoughts, Andreas?
Let's see what he's coming up with.
Okay.
As you know, I'm not the I'm coming from the Java world, so there was like we did a lot of testing through unit tests and so on. I'm not like, I think Keaton is more advanced here, but let's see. Most likely you guys can help.
And so, side conversation, maybe from coming back to the Spark discussion earlier. Let's answer this question, and maybe we can come back. But like, how important is it for us to start testing software versions? In other words, to like automatically test, okay, is all my code going to run on Spark 3 with Kafka, whatever version, and do like large scale integration testing to try to track down these issues? Okay, now let's talk about PyTest, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
I have to learn from beginning about PyTest in my new job. Congratulations. So, I guess like my question is, what testing frameworks have you had exposure to before? Coming from Python, actually, I'm kind of old school. I just use the regular unit test library in Python. But I think more broadly, Matt, to your question, there's, I'd like to talk about that for a bit. The importance of testing, in data engineering. Like, is this a practice that data engineers should do, or should they just ignore testing?
The look on your face.
No. Well, Joe, I don't want to steal your show. Like, tell us what's your thought on this? Like, how do you see this?
Testing is important. I think one of the, and I think we'll agree, some of the undercurrents of like data engineering, for example, is software engineering principles, right? So one of the big ones in software engineering is being able to test your code. There's different schools of thought in software engineering related to testing, test-driven development being the main one. I've worked on jobs where, you had to write tests before you write code. And that's kind of the mandate or the expectation. I would say that writing tests after the fact is, as long as you have the discipline of writing tests, I think it's fine. I don't necessarily totally subscribe to like test-driven development as a dogma per se, but I think that, the longer you go without writing tests, the bigger chance there is of you not writing a test, and then the bigger chance there is of something breaking. And that's just kind of how it is. It's just human nature. So I definitely think that if you're writing production grade code, you should be testing. I don't see any way around that. Would love a counter argument from the audience if there is one.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it seems like sometimes we need more of an emphasis on integration testing to like full scale systems testing. And the nice thing about the cloud, the good thing is that in principle, you can set up a test pipeline where you spin up containers with whatever version of Spark, for example, and then attempt to deploy your code to that and then see if it actually runs.
Well, that's a big thing though, right? In data engineering, it's interesting because there's, especially if you're using like prepackaged libraries, so Spark, Kafka, whatever, like what's the chance of you actually writing like a unit test for the Spark library, for example? You're typically going to use the components in there and you hope that they've written good tests on it. That was one of the things we also did, where if it's, you don't write a test if there's already, if it's for a library, the assumption is there's a test written. And so you don't need to write a test for the library, for example, right? Like it would be ridiculous to write a unit test for maybe the unit test library in Python. You just presuppose it's there. Yeah. But you're right, though, integration, because it's not just, so that brings you up a level, right? So integration and regression testing in your systems. So you're probably more doing systems testing to make sure things are working properly versus probably discrete, function testing or class testing, for example. But not to say you wouldn't do that if you're writing code for that. You shouldn't do that. So.
But either way, I think testing is very important. But I have had some situations where you're just like, this thing needs to be done, and nobody cares about the testing. And so people write the code and hope everything works, and when they do an update, that everything still works. Like it's a big problem that people like tend to only look at the raw development, like from zero to like we can deploy this, but actually making it safe, making it testable, that's always a bit of a struggle, because there's the cost in it that like nobody wants to have.
That's interesting. Why do you think they want to avoid that?
Well, most of the time it's just like if you're working in a within a client situation, you need to get done. Like the sales overpromised, like how fast stuff can get done, and then you're struggling. Definitely seen that.
Well, the problem too, if you're a consultant, is that the client may not have the culture to recognize that testing is even important. They're just like, get this done. We don't care. We want it done quickly. And they're like, okay, I'm not going to be around in a year, when you have to upgrade this and have to do regression testing. You realize that, right?
It's exactly the same as with documentation. Like,
yeah,
this stuff costs time. The actual development, that's only a part. And I don't know how you do it with the client that you say that you.
Well, one thing I think is you're going to come more into. I think it's one thing that's going to come more into vogue, especially as we're talking about kind of APIs and third-party systems, like a Fivetran hooking into Snowflake, for example, right? Like you can't really like unit test that because you don't own any of the code, and so. But and maybe one check is just data quality checks. As well as table status checks and so forth, right? So I think as the abstraction layers in data engineering, depending on what you're doing, become kind of more high level, right? Where it's simply just plug and play components. We see that kind of stack a lot, and it's emerging a lot more. I think the types of tests you're going to do also change, where it's going to be maybe less unit testing and more, again, kind of data quality checks. Like is the data correct? Because you're assuming that these lower level systems already have, the regression tests and everything in place for everything to work properly, and all the other kind of tests. So data quality checks like, great expectation, Y logs, Monte Carlo, and other types of observability and pipelines and quality and so forth. I think that's going to become more of a thing. And we were talking about this actually before the show, where like the kind of emerging trend is data governance and management. I know those are two Andreas's favorite words. So,
but I think
he's smiling in joy for this.
Yeah. I think also, there's a need to kind of take a new approach to these topics in some way. Part of the problem with traditional data governance is that there's this command and control assumption. In other words, if I have enough like people looking at the data in committees, then I can control it, and it's not going to spiral into something weird. But inherently, anyone who's worked with data for a long time knows that it's entropic. So new things are going to start showing up in the data that no one expected. And traditional data governance approaches, I think, struggle with that. But these newer testing frameworks, things like YLabs and Great Expectations, by just looking at the statistics of the data, do a better job of that by like dynamically saying, hey, is there something here we didn't expect? Let's dig into it and find out.
I'm a bit afraid of that people try to throw tools at it, just tools like not here we get this tool, this solves everything,
right.
this solves this, but at the end of the day the problems are somewhere else than just like having the nicest data governance tool for your 10 people startup. Like,
Yeah.
It is true, isn't it? I mean, I think at the end of the day, data governance is really it's an organizational and behavioral thing. Tools will get you so far, but it's like a lot of technology, though, isn't it? Where, I think a lot of the kind of the root causes of a lot of problems in business aren't necessarily the tools you're using. They can amplify it, but yeah, it's an interesting. Keaton has another question. Guys, I also like to know, what would you recommend to keep in mind to all new data engineers like me who are in their early phases of their new job? I'll let you two take this one.
Oh, this is a huge question. Andreas, I mean, you are the legendary trainer in data engineering. You want to start?
I think like Keaton and I, we also talked about this a bit, if I remember. Like, you need to keep at it and start or continue learning. Once you have that job, most likely a lot of stuff you don't know, and you need to try to learn for yourself. You need to ask your colleagues. Maybe try in bigger companies, try to find a network with people that are working on this, and so you're not like just sitting there alone and try to figure stuff out. But that's one of the big things. I think someone new in the job needs to realize that there's a lot more to learn.
There's a lot more to. I really love that. I really love that response. That's awesome.
Yeah. And the thing I'll add to that, no, that was awesome, is that technical people tend to be very myopic in their learning. So by that, I mean that there's this tendency to say, hey, this new database came out. I need to go learn that. There's a new streaming technology. I need to go learn that. But like you said, Andreas, like talking to colleagues is really critical, because I think in any career, the really critical thing is to identify where the field is going. And I think we saw this in the Hadoop world, where even in 2016, there were all these articles saying, hey, if you want to make a big salary, go learn Hadoop, become a big data engineer. And then people got completely blindsided by kind of the cloud migration. Whereas I think if you were looking forward and looking out in the tech space and saying, hey, a lot of startups are going to AWS, and they're using tools like EMR, and like big data skills are important, but maybe not the skills of actually installing Hadoop and some of the things I was training myself on. Versus if you're just being myopic, then you might say, go learn this one technology and not understand the bigger ecosystem and how it's changing.
I was actually just talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday. She had some questions on, she's transitioning to a data engineering role. I think she's been a software engineer and, done QA and so forth. So good technical background, but even she was asking me questions about, okay, so like, what's the difference between Mapreduce and Spark? And should I learn Mapreduce to be a data engineer? It's like, probably. I mean, I think it's good to know the context, and I think it's good to know the principles, but I think we're all probably in agreement, like data engineering isn't like Hadoop or Mapreduce or any of that stuff. It's really, but you need to understand the underlying principles of the technologies and sort of the data lifecycle, right? So what's the best ways, depending on your situation, what's the best ways to ingest data and store it and transform it and serve it and so forth? Like these are all concepts that actually take a bit of work to describe and understand. But it's easy to, I think, plug and play different tools and mistake that for being data engineering, because the field of data engineering is changing. I think right now it's even more rapid than it ever has been. There's so much going on. I think all of us have different perspectives on kind of where it is and where it's going. And that's, I think, part of the joy and also part of the problem is there's not it's not clear where this all goes from here. Right. But I think all of us are in agreement, like being able to continuously learn, that's probably the most important thing you can have in your career from like now all the way to when you're like super senior and awesome, because everything's going to change probably multiple times. Maybe the other thing is, learn to, like you say, Andreas, learn to work with your coworkers and get support, in that fashion. And then, it's just a tricky one because data engineering as a field, it's like I say, it's there's a lot happening right now, so it's kind of a mouthful, but go for it.
I think generally, there is the problem with with Hadoop in general. Let's start with Hadoop. I think you were right with Hadoop that people in the early or a few years ago, people were training just for Hadoop, and then they were like sidetracked. Oh, or not sidetracked. I don't think it's the right word, but like,
yeah, sideswiped.
Now everything moves to the cloud. Oh no, I learned some useless stuff. Right. But what we see is, and what I see with my students when they do some research in job descriptions, Hadoop is still a thing. In a lot of companies, they still have that as a requirement, but it's more like it adds to the whole thing. It's not like this. They just have Hadoop. They most likely have also some other stuff where they are on one cloud platform then as well.
Mm.
And that's why I think, for instance, as you said, Mapreduce, it's still good to learn, not from a hands-on perspective, like that you go in and set up a cluster and learn it, but to understand it, because when you think about Spark and you're working with RDDs, you're not with a fancy data frame API, then you're getting back to that Mapreduce stuff and work with your data.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So then it's good to have that knowledge how the data is processed.
Yeah, for sure. I think understanding that like MapReduce still, I think, highlights a lot of like distributed computing principles, right? Mapping, shuffling, and reducing. And understanding that is pretty fundamental, I would say, to understanding, Spark does essentially similar stuff. It just does it in memory, right? But it's the same principle, though. Maybe some other resources too. Designing Data Intensive Applications by Martin Kleppman, I think, is still like one of the best books ever written for data engineering. It highlights, I think, a lot of the key fundamentals that a data engineer should know.
Let's see for how long.
It's interesting. It was written in 2017, and I'm rereading it now, and it actually holds up really well, because I think he avoided the discussions of particular technologies and really focused on sort of the atomics of how things work. So yeah, we'll see for how long. But books like that. But it's also interesting because the learning progression too, for every one of like a data intensive application book, which may stand the test of time at least longer than some technical books, there's a whole bunch of technical books that are like basically expired by the time they hit the shelf. And so when you read those, you really have to understand, okay, it's like, what am I trying to study for? Am I trying to study for concepts that underlie these principles, or am I trying to just like learn a technology? And if you're trying to focus on the technology itself, like just go into it knowing that things might change. So
let me ask you guys another question. I mean, this is going back to the Hadoop discussion. What do we advise new data engineers about the tension between getting into a job where they're maintaining maybe some older stack? So say a company has a lot of pig jobs that process search data or something like this, versus trying to find a job where they're going to be doing the latest stuff. Because to your point, Andreas, like no one can just discard all the stuff they've built up just because some new technology comes out. Oh, we're migrating to the cloud, therefore we're just going to wipe the slate and get rid of all of our data processing jobs that have been running for 5 years.
Yeah, that's a big. I'm always a bit hesitant of like finding the company that uses the coolest new tools and so on. Do you really, like, for a beginner, do you really want to get into that position, or do you want to have something where you learn something that is already like in production and you can actually learn the techniques and so on, and not focus on, like with my Spark problem, just tenfold, like you're fighting with like early problems of the tool. So I think there's not really it's not a bad way of starting with Hadoop. Like if you find a Hadoop job, you don't have to do it forever. Then do it 1.5 years or something, and then you know it, and then you move on. You search for the next thing. Then you throughout this practice, you are going to see where it leads you, what interests you, and then you can specialize in something else.
Yeah, it definitely goes back to the continuous learning part too, where where you start is not where you're going to end up. And so you just got to be very flexible and adapt. Like, yeah, I don't think there's like a right way to go into things at all normally. So,
Yeah, but Matt made a good point earlier as well, like how we try to always find the newest thing and to actually use. And I'm not better. Like it's also something I hustle with. But the thing is, I think a good data engineer should know, is this actually the right tool for the job or not? And that's a very, very important skill, not to just jump on this thing and on the next thing and try this and try that, but to first like find out, is that actually the right tool for the job? Is this overpowered? Like, do you really need just do you really need airflow, or does a simple cron job for your 2 jobs that you schedule once a day is enough? Like, of course, it would be cool to work with airflow, but do you need it? Most likely not. I had this discussion this morning.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, what are you saying?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I really like Airflow and I've done a lot of trainings on it, but I also know that it's a huge pain in the butt to maintain. And so I always kind of caution people away from it at first and like, okay, how complex is your stack? And then at some point you might want Airflow. But yeah, there's always that tension. And that's like the really hard part of data engineering to actually learn, is like where those boundaries are and what the right tools are. Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, no, we just got a question here from Suhas. Do you think learning Microsoft technologies takes higher priority than learning AWS? Microsoft seems to package it all together while selling a proposition to corporates. What are you guys' thoughts on this?
Matt,
I'm very opinionated. So
you're very opinionated. Oh, let's hear it.
what can I say about Azure? So of the major cloud players, Azure is kind of the most painful to use unless you're in a Microsoft stack. So I generally find that like blob storage is more painful than like using S3. Networking is more painful, but if you're in a Microsoft environment, then Azure is awesome. Like their AD capability, like spinning up SQL Server is super simple, whereas if you try to do it on Google Cloud or AWS, it gets more complicated. I don't know. I mean, I would say what it comes down to is I think GCP is going to be really successful. AWS is going to be really successful, and so will Azure. And so part of it is, do you like working with Microsoft technologies? If you do, then go learn Azure. If you don't, then maybe go learn GCP or AWS and find a job that uses those instead.
Yeah, I think that because he uses the keywords like higher priority, right? And so I would guess that this assumes like your priority is probably your company's priority. And if your company is a Microsoft shop, then I would go out on a limb and say do AWS or do Azure. Azure, Microsoft is making it, I would say, more difficult for other cloud providers from a pricing perspective, licensing perspective, and everything else. Plus, if you're in Microsoft, everything plays nice with Azure from the beginning. If you have SSIS, guess what? You can upload into the cloud pretty easy in Data Factory. I mean, so everything's all Microsoft stuff's a first-class citizen in Azure, and I think that my suspicion is actually Azure is going to be the biggest cloud when everything's said and done, just because of the number of Microsoft stacks out there that are still on-prem that haven't gone. Matt and I call these dark matter companies. Yeah. And dark matter tech stacks, but it's like all this Microsoft stack that's still run on-prem. If that goes to the cloud, that's a lot of money and a lot of utilization. So, but again, highest priority, that totally depends on your company. I mean, we work a lot with AWS. AWS ain't going anywhere at all. They keep growing a lot. So it just depends. I could make the same argument basically for like Ali Cloud. If you're in China, probably want to use that or Tencent Cloud. So it's just, what you have anything to add, Andreas?
Yeah, it's exactly. You're having the right point. Like the company, where's the company heading? If you want to stay there longer, also the geographical thing is really important. I had a student from Norway, and we were trying to figure out like what cloud should he learn, and he went for Azure because like he was looking at job descriptions. Everything is with Azure. Nothing is with AWS. And then it would not make sense if you want to stay in that country to learn AWS because nobody's using it.
Right.
And but the general thing, the general direction is, I think right now, I have a site where they search or where they scrape the data engineer descriptions, the job descriptions, and they have roughly 50% is AWS, and 30 is Azure, and around 10% is GCP or something worldwide.
Interesting.
And like, but that only shows you a general direction. That doesn't show you in your area, in your.
Right.
It could be that it is that in your industry that it's not good, or right?
Yeah,
Like in
it might be none of the above.
in financial business, nobody's using whatever Azure,
Right.
and everybody's goes for AWS or the other way around.
Depending on the company, I see some companies using purely DigitalOcean actually, and it's none of the above clouds actually. So, so just it totally depends. I got a quick question here. Please provide the list of DE books or books that DE should read. I'll put these in the comments. So Edward has a question. It's kind of, well, there's a two-part question here. I'm a data analyst. My company wants to transition me to doing ETL. Find new ETLs and transition away from our current technologies in GCP that we are unable to hire for. We are thinking of replacing Airflow with a new tool that's 95% drag and drop. And then he says data prep from Trifacta. Geez, we've used these tools before. Matt, do you have any thoughts on these?
Yeah, I actually really like data prep. I like, well, Trifacta. So data prep, basically, to give people context, is the GCP specialized version of Trifacta. And Trifacta is like this interactive visual tool that lets you handle data quality issues and data processing, and to some extent build data pipelines. So yeah, it's a cool tool. I think, what can I say about that versus Airflow? Like every tool, it has some limitations. And so that's kind of what you have to watch out for. I've seen where typically we have a lot of success deploying Airflow is where you have to do a lot of custom API work that is not supported like tools like Fivetran. You're interacting with a lot of obscure APIs and needing to manage a lot of custom Python code to pull data out of those APIs. Then Airflow becomes a really awesome tool. And Trifacta and Data Prep will not do that stuff for you. It's basically, they call it what do they call it? Data Wrangler. So it's designed to deal a lot with data quality and processing issues, and it can do things like joins and such, but it's not going to be quite as general purpose as a general purpose ETL tool. So I don't know if that answers the question at all. What are your thoughts on this, Joe?
They're kind of different tools, though. I think like Airflow is an orchestration tool, and it's the same problem you run into with because like at least the GCP version of Data Prep, or at least last time we checked, I know that they're coming out with a kind of their own. Kind of Trifacta is doing kind of a more standalone version of Data Prep now, but you know, use Dataflow under the hood, and you know, you'd still use Airflow to orchestrate Dataflow jobs typically, right? Like, Dataflow has its own sense of a DAG, but at the same time, it's like it's internal to that specific job. Yeah, and to orchestrate multiple jobs, you're still going to need some way of orchestrating them. So I would say maybe don't completely throw out Airflow.
That's what I would say.
It's kind of two different tools. He does say coming from SSIS, Data Prep looks nice. Yeah, probably.
It's a cool tool. What I would recommend too, Edward, is go through the trainings. There are all these online video trainings, and go through them. Like Data Prep is one of those tools that looks super easy, and it is, but the actual training will make you much, much more proficient.
Yeah. You know, selfishly, obviously hit us up with questions. We work with all these companies here. So just message me if you have more questions.
One thing I would be interested in is why they said transition away from our current technologies on GCP that we are unable to hire for.
That's a good question.
So why unable to hire for? Like, can't they get people because they don't have like capacity for them? Like they can't hire somebody, or can't they find someone?
Yeah.
It's a bit strange that like what's going on there, right? If not, the first thing would be to actually try to train people on that that you have, and not if you can't find people, have people just like Edward who like know the company, know the data, come from an analyst's perspective where they most likely have really good insight, and then try to, if they're interested in the computer science thing, try to get them a few courses in GCP. I mean, how hard can it be? They most likely only use a few tools though, so you.
And DC, he can't find new people who know Scala and GCP. So
interesting. So I kind of wonder if they can use BigQuery or Snowflake on GCP, because I mean it's all SQL based, and so even if you start as a strong analyst, you can become pretty proficient in ETL on one of those tools.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, I would say the number of people who know GCP, if we center on that, I mean, that's growing. The number of people who know Scala, I think that's an interesting. I'd love your opinion on this, Andreas. What do you think about Scala in 2021? Like how?
I'm not the fan.
Not
I never was a fan of Scala. Like coming from the Java world, it was always like this bit weird thing that you have to learn only for Spark. So, I would say the first thing would be to try to refactor everything from Scala away to Python.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I remember taking Martin Odersky's Scala course way back in the day, and I think I came away more confused than anything. I was like, so it's not quite Java. It has a lot of ways of doing stuff, and I'm not sure what the right way is of doing anything in Scala. And so, when PySpark came out, I was overjoyed. It's an interesting language, and I found the documentation is. It was always lacking, and I think it was really inconsistent. So just learning Scala, which is a very dense language, by the way. This isn't like learning Python, for example, which I think is like dead simple. Scala is hard. It's real hard. Yeah. And to combine like the object-oriented with the functional paradigms in Scala, right? Like that's context switching is difficult. But yeah, I don't know. But I would say the number of people who know Scala these days, I'd say anecdotally, I don't have any proof of this, but I would say it's probably declining. Yeah. Just because there's probably better options out there. So. But as far as people who know GCP, I think that number continues to grow. For the simple anecdotal reason too, that I look at the cert numbers of people when they post their certifications online, because it has like a sequential number as far as I can tell, and it keeps growing a lot. So there's people who know GCP, and GCP, we just saw an article this morning in Cloud Wars that GCP's, they're blowing up a lot right now. I would say that they stand a chance of being, a very solid 3 or number 2 cloud at some point. Not even kidding. So, I'd say, the number of people who know GCP globally is pretty high if you can hire. But yeah, anyway.
In fact, I think we can link this back to what you were saying earlier, Andreas. This sounds maybe more like a tool selection problem than a cloud selection problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. If when you look out there, everybody is learning Python nowadays. Mm-hmm. So you would want to move away from Scala. You would want to move away from whatever, and you want to go towards the Python route, so you can get as many people as possible, or get very easily a new coworker that helps you with this job. Like it's.
Got a question here from Anish. Can we replace Fivetran with an open source tool? Full disclosure, we are Fivetran partners. So as well as partners with other people. So there's no possible way you can replace Fivetran with an open source tool. It's not physically possible. Your life will be miserable. But I would say, for the purpose of just answering the question and just, helping you understand the options out there, I would first suggest seeing if Fivetran can actually work for you. But if you really want to go the open source route, there are some options out there. There's Airbyte, there's Meltano. I would say those are the 2 I would start with. There's Singer as well, but I think Singer is like going the way of a slow, quiet demise. But
does Meltano use Singer?
Yeah. Well, as far as I can tell, what they're doing is they're basically maintaining the Singer taps, right?
Got it. Okay.
But like the Singer, I think that it seems like the core community, and correct me if I'm wrong if anyone in the Singer community wants to call me out on this, but it seems like it's just not getting the love it kind of needs from the core. Yeah. So But yeah, I mean, there's options out there right now, and I would say there's going to be continue. The connector space is insanely hot right now, right? Like, I think people saw the success of Fivetran, and they're like, "Cool, let's do that too." So you get tools built on top of Debezium, for example, and other technologies. And I think the space is just heating up. Frankly, it seems like every day there's a new connector company coming up out of the woodwork, and so
I was recently talking with somebody from Airbyte, and I had no idea, but like I think it's from what I have seen, I think this stuff is really cool and really useful. So I would also look into Airbyte.
Yeah,
for that. I think they're a newer company, right? They're
pretty new, yeah.
But they have it seems like a lot of connectors and and the
Good
cool thing with
community.
open source is really that you most likely have that community behind it.
Yeah,
that actually works on this stuff.
Full disclosure, we also partner with Airbyte, so.
So,
But to us, the connection space is an interesting one because I think there's a lot of nuance in the space, right? And so it's not really like not one connector company to rule them all, or not one connection thing to rule them all. I think that there's so many different options, and like we see a lot of people plugging and playing and mixing and matching these tools too, where like Fivetran might be used here, Matillion might be used here, you might use Airbyte here, and it's very kind of heterogeneous in that sense. Part of this, I think, is from a convenience and cost perspective. It's like, and it's also availability of connectors. It's the other part of it. So if company A has a connector and it's really hard to make, like Google Search Console comes to mind. Like if you try writing that connector by hand, have fun with that. That sucks. Or you can just go buy it, and we'd highly recommend buying it if you unless you want to be in an asylum at some point. But on other hands, like stuff that like connects like MySQL to Snowflake, for example, there's like a million versions of this right now, right? And so it's just kind of a question of like, how do you want to do things? So,
but generally, that's also where what we talked about earlier, where the variety comes into play. What right now is out there. Like there's not one tool that does everything because there is so much stuff out there, and people have so many different problems that you need something. And that's also like what we talked earlier with the like there are more and more data sources coming because like people start with the main business case and connect a few databases that they have in their actual on their production pipelines, and then they have new ideas and integrate more and more and more, and stuff grows.
Yeah, I think the number, I was just looking up a stat, like the number of MarTech tools alone, and I think it's in the thousands, right? Like I think there's 8,000 marketing MarTech tools out there right now. So I mean that should give you an idea, right? If there's 8,000 different tools or companies out there with marketing tech alone, not including finance, not including CRMs, not including anything else, it's a pretty vast space. So. We get hit up. I would say often. Just can you guys help us with this like custom connector, like maybe a Fivetran custom connector? And so we need to look into different data sources, and it never ends. Every company basically has an API right now. I would say, well, I wouldn't say every company, but most companies have an API or some way of getting data. And so every one of those is an opportunity for data ingestion. But but it all depends on who wrote the API. That's sort of the catch-22 here. So,
and it remains a part of a data engineer's job, right? Like even if you're using Fivetran, not every API is going to be supported. There are constantly new APIs. So either you're going to end up writing some custom Python code or writing a custom Fivetran connector if you still want to use Fivetran. So still remains a big part of the job, as it turns out.
Yeah,
cool.
Well, but just connecting to a source and getting the data is only one part.
Yep.
Right? You need to try to figure out, okay, what are the actual goals that we want to reach with this? What would be the best storage solution for this? And so on and so on. So I think that's where, even though you have like a click and drag and drop tool, you need to understand actually like what do we want to do, and you need to design the destination for that.
That's so true. That's so true. Well, cool. I think it's a good place to wrap up. Thanks to Andreas again. Thanks for showing up. Always fun to chat with you. I feel like we can chat for hours. We'll have you on another few weeks. And thanks to the audience for the questions. I think it's good, a lot of good questions, a lot of good interaction, and so happy that people are finding our Monday morning data chat useful. So, Andreas, for people who want to learn more about you and your academy, how would they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn if you watch this on LinkedIn, Andreas Kretz, or my YouTube channel, same name, Andreas Kretz, or my academy at learndataengineering.com.
Yeah, he's the guy. If you want to learn data engineering, go check him out. He's doing awesome stuff.
Go to learn data engineering.
Go learn data engineering. Okay, awesome. And for Matt and I, we're Ternary Data. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe to our newsletter at ternarydata.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Ternary Data, and we'll see you all next week. Take care.